Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CQI's first webinar of 2021. We've got a very exciting and informative year ahead, building on what we've been covering last year, and we're looking forward to continuing these webinars for our members in the UK and overseas. Thank you all for joining us. It's always great to see so many attendees at these webinars. Just a couple of notices before we begin. This webinar will be recorded and a recording will be made available in the members area of the CQI website after the webinar has concluded. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit your questions via the question function in the GoToWebinar control panel. At the end of the webinar, at the end of the presentation, I will pose these questions to the speakers and we'll endeavour to cover as many as possible. If we're unable to cover all the questions, we can look at them offline. So please do make sure that you submit any questions that you may have throughout. There is a slide deck which will be made available along with other documents. These can be accessed via the handout function, also on the GoToWebinar control panel. Importantly, after the webinar is completed, take some time to reflect on what you've learnt, how it contributes to your professional development goals, and record it in your CPD log. With no further ado then, I'd like to introduce our presenters for today's webinar from Quality Training and Management Limited. We're very grateful to welcome back Jeff Vorley, who is managing who's managing director of QM&T. He's been quality manager for numerous organisations over the years and associate lecturer at the University of Surrey, as well as a best-selling, internationally recognised author on the subject of quality management. Always a pleasure to have you here, Jeff. I'd also like to introduce Mary Claire Bushell, also from QM&T, where she joined 20 years ago, implementing and maintaining ISO 9001 systems for organisations in the construction sector. Over that time, Mary Claire has developed material for a full range of CQI diploma and certificate courses, as well as the training courses offered by IRCA and the CQI by QM&T and other approved training providers. Mary Claire is now tutor on these courses, particularly supporting students with their distance learning studies. I'm very pleased to welcome you both, and with no further ado, would like to hand over for today's session on information security management systems. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Alex. Lovely. Thanks very much for that. Okay, so as Alex has said, my name's Jeff Vorley. I'm talking from Quality Management and Training Limited. Welcome to the Information Security Management Systems webinar. Just as a synopsis of the session, every business is a potential target for cyber attackers, and data breaches becoming more frequent and severe and costly. And many organisations still assume they are safe. Implementing a information management security management system can secure information, increase resilience to cyber attacks, and reduce the impact costs associated with information breaches. So there are a number of costs associated with security breaches, and we're going to have a look at those as we go through the session. The webinar is based on CQI IRCA's certified courses. There's an FD 119 Information Security Management System course and a PT 241 Internal Auditors course. So if you're particularly interested in gaining a qualification and more importantly, more knowledge in terms of implementing information management security systems, you might like to look at both of those. You can follow the links when you get the web download when you get the slide download, you should be able to follow those links. Alternatively, you can do it by visiting CQI's website or our website, www.qmt.co.uk, where you can find more information about those two courses. We've been around since '84, providing services, products and services and quality assurance. We're a registered and accredited education centre for CQI since '84, offering a wide selection of courses. Our students have won the Best Student Award, CQI Award, and we want to assist students in maximising their potential and provide dedicating support and guidance to those students. You've heard about me, so we don't need to bother with this slide. So the contents of the webinar is we're going to have a look at what's the imperatives for ISMS, what drives us for it, what are the drivers for it. We'll have a look at the introduction to ISO 27001 and the structure of 27001 and its relationship with 27000 and 27002. And we'll have a look at those standards. We'll have a look at the content of them, a brief look at the content, a program of introduction, and what the next step associated with these standards would be. And the webinar will assume some knowledge of management systems, but little knowledge of information management security systems. So we've had some recent headlines, some recent security disasters. British Airways faced a recently £183 million fine for a data breach. The Zoom boss, very topically, I think we're using GoToWebinar rather than Zoom, apologised for security breaches and promised fixes. EasyJet admits that 9 million customers were hacked, including their credit card details. And a German company had a £14.5 million euro fine, against the General Data Protection Act. So organisations, the costs associated with things, not just in terms of reputation, but financial costs as well, can be quite severe. But it's not those costs that probably hurt the most. It's the rushing around cost associated with the firefighting the problem, trying to do immediate action to resolve these problems, these hacked problems and these down problems and these vulnerabilities, so that we've got to rush around and put these things right. And then it's not finished then, because we've got to understand how this thing happened in the first place and make sure that it never, ever, 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 ever happens again. And that's not easy, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it's very damaging to the business. So what we're talking about today is about prevention and a preventative approach, hoping that we can avoid some of these disasters associated with information management security. So the purpose and benefits then, well, customers and partners expect it. It may be on the radar of some of your customers. It may be on the radar of some of your directors. It may be that some of your customers are already prodding you in this sort of direction because they're concerned about the information that they provide you with, and also making sure that you're secure and yourself are secure and can continue to supply. So that tumbles down the chain as well to suppliers that supply you as well. The law demands it. There's a number of legal issues surrounding this information management security that we need to take due cognizance of. Competitive environment and access to information could make the difference between success and failure. Clients of mine working in the software industry these days on cloud, they're very concerned about the ability of hackers to get into that information, and it could irreparably damage their company. Increasing exposure via networks, viruses, decentralized control. These days, we're all working from home, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the way you think about it. And that means that there are vulnerabilities as a consequence of that. Information is an asset, and we need to protect it. So what is a quality management information management system then, an ISMS? Well, it's just the same as any other We've got a process going on along here, which could be operating the CRM system or the backup system or the antivirus system or the whatever system, and we need to collect data about that system and compare it with our goal, which is to be secure. And we'll have some policies and standards and protocols in place that we need to make sure that that we're following. And if we're not following, we apply some controls to the system. And if we think that these we can improve these, then those controls will be improved. So it's a standard ISMS. It's a standard management system approach. So it's no different from any of the other standards that we've got around the place. The structure and content, it's got a number of levels to it. We've got the top level, which is ISO 9000, which is the overview and the vocabulary. We've got 27001, which is the information security requirements. There's 2 for certification bodies, and there's 9 for specific industrial requirements. And then sitting underneath that are some guide standards as well. So there's 27002 code of practice associated with ISO 27000. A guidance document, how we measure our information security management system with the 27004, and risk management, audits, audit controls, guidance, governance, economics, and all of these are guidance standards associated with information security. Underneath these, we've got the sector-specific standards. So this could be the telecom sector, the finance sector, the energy sector, the public, and so on. So there are a number of sector guides. We don't need to worry about any of these others. We're going to be focusing on 7001 and 7002. We'll leave those other standards to another day. So there are only 2 that really count, and that's 27001 and 27002, the code of practice. So let's focus on those then. So we've got the 27001 security techniques and there's also some other standards that sit around the place as well, like 2770 privacy information as well, and I think there's another one for business security, business continuity management, which is 22301 as well. So there's any number around the place. We're just going to focus on these 2, 27001 and 27002. The structure is the same as most management system standards, and you can see these numbers that we've got. So 5 is still leadership, 6 is planning, 7 is support and operation, performance evaluation is 9, and improvement is 10. And we've got this plan, do, check, act cycle. And those paragraph numbers and titles are pretty much the same as you would expect to see in any management system, and don't really change. They're based on this Annex SL methodology. So we've got the various clauses, 1, scope, 2, normative reference, and so on. And if you're used to management systems, you'll recognize these numbers as associated with most of these management system standards that we can see here. So 27001, quality is 9000, health and safety 45,000, and so on. So this structure at this level is very similar, and although there are some nuances associated with this that we need to address, the very basic structure of this thing is exactly the same, Annex SL type. So what about 27002 then, the code of practice? Well, it's pretty big document. It's 80 pages long. So if you want to beat somebody up, pick this standard up and wield it. It's a very specific code of practice, and it's unusual with this regard, because it's quite prescriptive in what it says, and so it's relatively unusual for these sorts of standards to be so prescriptive or precise. But it's a code of practice, so we don't need to worry about it because it's just there as guidance. Well, unfortunately not. It doesn't work that way. It's Annex A to 27001, which makes this list of 27002 a code of practice. And so there is a list of requirements. It becomes basically a list of requirements. And what are those lists of requirements then? Well, I'm going to leave this slide up here for a little while to give you a chance to take on board all these words that are splashed across the screen. And so you can start to get the idea that it is quite a prescriptive standard when it starts to talk about mobile devices and teleworking, for example, in 6.2, just as one example. So paragraph 4 talks about the structure of the standard. There are 14 clauses with 35 main security categories associated with them, and there's 114 controls associated with this guidance document. The paragraph 5 or section 5 covers policies such as access control. So who has access control to your systems? How do we control the access control to our systems? Where do we store that information? How is it managed? Part of that is information classification. Part of section 5 is information classification. How do we classify data? Do we classify it as secret, as super secret, or general information that anybody can use? And so it looks at the way in which we classify and handle that information as well. So if it's secret, how is it managed? Who has access to it and who cannot have access to it? It talks about the physical and environmental security issues. So how can people actually get into a building or even into the systems as well? And how is that controlled? What is the acceptable use of those assets is still in paragraph 5. And what would the acceptable use of those? Clear desk and clear screen policy. Again, very specific things is in paragraph 5. Information transfer, how we transfer information between the various groups and outside of the organization and inside the organization. Use of mobile devices and teleworking, working from home remotely. How do we control those things? What sort of controls do we want to see placed on those things? Do we allow people to use their own equipment? Is it bring your own equipment that's allowed within the organization? And if that's the case, what demands do we place on that equipment, including mobile phones and the use of hard disks and portable hard disks and things of that nature? The restrictions on software installation, what software installation are people allowed to install on their machines, and who controls the installation of that software? How is that information backed up? So you get an idea now that this is starting to be quite a significant area of 27,000, and we need to address by some means, which I'll be talking about in a few minutes, all of these various requirements, because they are requirements. They're not just, although they're part of the guide. So one of the ways in which we do that is with a thing called a statement of applicability. And this is an integral and key part of 27,000, is to create this this statement of applicability. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes is we're going to have a look at the statement of applicability, then we'll look at the scoping statement, then we'll look at risk assessments, and then we'll look at business continuity, and then we'll move into looking at how we implement all of these things. So I'm going to start firstly with this statement of applicability, and its requirement is in paragraph 6 of 27,001, where there is a requirement to produce a statement of applicability that controls the necessary controls and justification for inclusion, and also justification for any exclusions as well, because if you're going to exclude anything from this statement of applicability, you need to justify that as well. The chances are you won't be able to exclude anything, because almost all of those things that I showed you in 27,002 will be applicable to your organization. Here's a typical statement of applicability. So we've taken two Annex A controls. We've got 712, 712, 721 and 722. What's the control title? Well, for 712, it's terms and conditions of employment. What's the description of that? Well, it's the contractual agreement with employees and contractors stating their organisation's responsibility for information security. Is it applicable? Yes. Where are the procedures and justification for this being applicable? Well, there's the terms and conditions of employment. There's the policies on confidentiality. There's the policy on privacy policy, and there's legal reasons for this being included. It may be that NDAs might need to be included in that aspect as well. 721 is management responsibilities. Managers are required, all employees and contractors, to apply information security in accordance with established policies and procedures. Where are they? Well, here they are. They're HR's procedures, onboarding procedures, and business reasons procedures associated with management responsibility. What about 722, information security, awareness and training? All employees in the organisation, where relevant contractors, shall receive appropriate awareness and education and training. And there are procedures, onboarding procedures and training procedures that need to be considered. And so this is quite a large document, as you can imagine, because it's got to address all of the Annex A requirements that we saw in 27002. Okay, what about the scope then? So here we've got a typical scope statement for an organisation. So this is information security associated with the supply of software products and cloud-based solutions of organisations, names, head office. That's obviously a fairly software-based organization. It could just as easily been the police force or a medical industry. Information security associated with a hospital or anything else. So that would be the scoping statement, and we need to consider the geographic aspects of that, and that could be the societal ones in terms of the government, the local and media, the external ones, the customers' information, partners' information, suppliers' information, and organisationally as well in terms of products and service and offices locations. Are we just doing the head office, or are there a number of outlying services as well? And what about partners? Have we included them? That's it. That's the external aspect of information management security. What about the internal aspects of it then? So we've considered what assets need to be. So we need to consider internally what assets are being embraced by the information management security system. The asset scope, the business process, where it's held, and who the asset who the asset owner is. So here we've got a table again for internal scope and ownership. So we've got one area is customer confidential information. That information source is the customer support data. The process is the customer support process. The process system is the customer's relationship management database, the CRM, and the customer support manager owns that particular resource. So we need to detail all of these assets that are scoped internally, and that's an example for customer support data. It might be for intellectual property rights as well. So commercial data regarding business systems and various business operations, office applications, business applications, shared drives, servers, cloud-based storage, and that's potentially held by the IT manager. In this case, these are just examples. Okay, so we've done our SOA and we've decided on the scope, and we need to put together a risk assessment and risk treatment plan. And this is a typical process for creating a risk process and risk treatment plan. And so we can see here if there's a new risk identified, we complete a new risk assessment and establish a risk priority number associated with that. If above a particular threshold, then we need to add it to the risk tracker and establish the treatment plan, and then complete that treatment and close the tracker. All pretty straightforward. So what would the risk assessment typically consist of then? What would that mean? Well, in the next example, I've got a risk assessment, and I tend to use a standard risk assessment methodology called FMEA, Failure Mode Effects Analysis methodology. There are many other risk analysis methodologies out there that you can employ. Please choose your own. It's just that this one is recognized pretty widely. It's probably the most widely used risk assessment methodology. I find it the most easiest to use, but that's not to say there aren't any others that you perhaps want to employ. The only thing I would say with regard to that is that you should give consideration to the fact that it should be a recognized methodology. So it shouldn't really be the Jeff Vorley risk assessment methodology, if you see what I mean, because I don't have one, or I haven't created one. I use the more widely used ones. So it should really be something that's widely recognized. But anyway. So normally it comprises of an FMA would comprise for the risk treatment with the title, the author date, priorities, numbers, and those sort of things. And it should comprise of the, and I'll show you an example in a few minutes so you get the idea of this. But it should comprise of the information asset or area, the disaster function that it's trying to protect, that needs to be protected, the possible security failure modes, its vulnerabilities, the effects of if there's a security breach, what the impact will be of that, what the cause of this failure could be, and the current controls that are in place. And that gives us a risk priority number by multiplying the threat, multiplied by the vulnerability, multiplied by the severity and impact. Sorry, the threat multiplied by the severity or impact multiplied by the vulnerability gives us a risk priority number. So let's have a quick look at these at a particular standard. A risk assessment associated with these. So here we've got this is our typical FMEA, and this is a section associated with buildings and secure areas. So the information asset or area that we want to control is the building secure. Is the building secure? And that's the security function. Possible failure mode could be fire, break-in, or flood, and you may be able to think of some other reasons as well. So the vulnerability is fire, break-in, or flood. The effects would be that we'd lose the building, and then we've broken down the cause into fire, flood, and break-in, and we've broken each of those down. And the current controls are that we've got the landlord processes and fire control process and other controls managed and monitored by the a financial officer, chief financial officer. And here we've got the likelihood of occurrence, the severity if it does occur, the likelihood of ability to detect those things, and we've got our risk priority numbers, which are pretty low, so we don't need any action. However, if there was, and these breached our risk priority number, then we need to put some actions in here. Okay. Let's have a look then, finally, just in this element of looking at the key pieces of information that you need to put together for our information management security management system. Here we've got our typical disaster recovery and business continuity plan. And this would normally comprise of the scope and the introduction. So we've got and this is a typical business continuity plan contents list that you can see on the right hand side here. So we've got the scope and the introduction associated with that. We've got some scenarios that we might want to establish. So and these scenarios, there can be any number of them, but the fairly typical scenarios could consist of loss of office, a pandemic, server unavailable, loss of a key member of staff, could be a particular business process is totally unavailable. So we could list out a number of various disaster scenarios associated with what would be a disaster. We'd need to put in place a disaster recovery plan. We need to establish the team who's going to manage any disaster recovery, their roles and the responsibility. And we need to establish the scenario response. So loss of office, what would the scenario response typically there? If so, what would we we'd have to detail what we do about it. In the main, that's probably going to be working from home and those sort of things. But it may not be as easy as that when we're talking about equipment and things that we need. So if it's an office-based environment, then that's not too bad. But a scenario response where it's a key building that's got equipment in it that we need access to, then that scenario response might be much larger. Then we need to establish what the tests will be. So having established our scenario response, how can we test that those sort of things work? Well, we could do that test fairly readily if it's working from home and we're saying, well, we just send people home and they can work from home. You can do a test of that fairly readily, and unfortunately we have been, obviously as a result of the things that were problems we've got around us today. But it may be that it's got to be much wider than that. But so the scenario test could be, have we managed to let people work from home? And we could run that test and then we do the scenario test results. So you can imagine that that can be quite simplistic, but also it could be quite complicated as well, where the scenarios that we're talking about are quite complicated. Have we considered our disaster scenarios? Have we considered what they could be and what the implications of those are? Can we respond to them? Can we test that we can respond to them? Have we got evidence to show that we can manage the situation satisfactorily? It sounds complicated, but it's actually not that difficult to do, believe it or not. I've done it on a number of occasions now. Have a look at an implementation plan then. So this is a typical implementation plan associated with information management security and how we go about introducing information management security. So the first stage, we've been looking at statements of applicability, and we've looked at scope, and we've looked at risk assessment, and we've looked at the BCP, business continuity planning, and all of those steps we need to have considered, and those are things that we need to do. So what we're going to do now is look at a plan of introducing those aspects and completing those tasks associated with developing the statement of applicability and the scope and the risk, doing the risk assessment and doing the BCP. So, and this is detailed here as a typical introduction plan that we could follow, which details the step-by-step approach. So the first stage is probably the most important stage. I think it's probably the 6 most important words associated with any improvement initiative are management commitment, management commitment, management commitment. Because without that management commitment, then the rest of this is a waste of time. And typically, the way in which you would get that management commitment is through a meeting. So that there'd be a meeting with the key heads, the directors, the key managers with the business, and you'd probably want to do a presentation to them along the lines that I've just given to you, explaining what the work involved in it, and explaining the issues for the organization and the dangers and the imperatives for the organization. So you want to do that as some sort of presentation to the team to get them to understand the implications of all of these things. Having done that, then we need to go around the room and just confirm, are we bought into this? Do we think that we need to do something about this and follow this plan that I'm just going to outline to you in a few seconds? Do we need to bother with this? And we can go around the room and yes, and perhaps one of the managers might pipe up and say, well, actually, we're really busy at the moment in the sales department, and I don't know that we've got enough time to get involved in all of these things. Or we're very busy in the IT department because they're going to be fundamentally in all this. We're very busy and we're not sure that we can get ourselves involved in this at the moment. And so at that point, we've got to say, well, okay, fine. Let's talk about the issues. Let's talk about the problems they've got and we can resolve them. And if we can't, and they're digging their heels in and say we can't, then at that point we've got to stop, because we haven't got a commitment to do these things. Because the last thing you want when you embark on this program is going into the IT department and saying to the IT man, can I talk to you about the statement of applicability, or can I talk to you about some of these policies? And he says, Jeff, I'm too busy at the moment, mate. And I already, you recognise, I said this at the meeting. Well, if he did say that at the meeting, that's what I'm saying. You've got to get him to buy into that, because when you go to see him, you need his support, you need his active commitment to this. And he's got to have said, yes, well, when you were at that meeting, Mr. IT Manager, you said we were going to do these things, and I've come to do them with you. And if you can't do them, you go back to the board and tell them you can't do them. Don't tell me, because you agreed to do them at that meeting. So it's really important that we can move forward with these things. So having done that, we need to perform a gap analysis, and we can use the templates that I've already spoken about in terms of 27,000 and 27,002 in terms of that gap analysis, and we can identify any short measures associated with that. We can then, having done that gap analysis, reconfirm management commitment and flesh out these steps associated with it. So identifying the information management security team, the assets in the potentially second month, although these timescales are just very arbitrary. Identify information assets, complete the statement of applicability, establish the policies and procedures and controls that we need to put into place, perform the risk assessment and the risk treatment plan. So we've got our risk treatment plan and how actions are going to take. Select and implement any additional controls associated with disaster recovery or business continuity planning. Create our information management security system. Then train and make people aware that, make sure they're aware of all these processes and systems are in place, and then do a number of audits associated with those, pre-assessment, and then if you're going for external assessment, pre-assessment and third party, and then beyond that we have to maintain the systems. So this introduction plan is pretty similar to any other introduction plan for a management system. The key bits that we need to concern ourselves with are these bits in the middle here. You're probably pretty much used to those other end bits. Who's involved? Well, all senior management will be involved. HR will have a significant role to play in terms of people and processes and policies and implementation. Legal department may have an implementation interpretation of those standards, although there are quite a lot of information in terms of legal, and I might talk about this a little bit later on the government website. So if you look on the government websites, you'll find a lot of information there about GDPR and Data Protection Act and stuff like that. So there's a lot of information there with regard to that on websites, but you'll need to involve because it's got certain nuances for you. For your organization, the IT department have a major role to play, and you really do need to get them to buy into all of this stuff and make sure they're aware of this and are really behind you in trying to drive this through. Staff and users, trading partners, so partners. You need to consider the interfaces between those trading partners, and this is particularly important. Outsource companies. I don't know how many of you outsource your IT, your support services are external, but a lot of them are cloud services, email services, IT support, backup, disaster recovery may even be outsourced. And we've got to be really careful here, because are you going to just let them decide and just hope that they're okay? Or are you going to take an active role in that part of the business as well, in making sure that they're up to the standard we want them to be? So typical components will be the manual, the risk assessment, statement of applicability, disaster recovery plan, the forms, the training forms, the management records, management reviews, which you readily recognize, audit records, and define responsibilities for security. We need to train the staff associated with these things. So there's user training, there's compliance, intellectual property rights, data protection, computer misuse, GDPR, and so on. And there's a standard there that I just draw your attention to, which you might find useful in terms of 27701 one, security techniques for privacy information management, and you might like to make yourself aware of that standard as well. So what next? So there are many training providers associated with information management security, but if you want to, if you feel that this is something that you want to embark upon yourself, you might like to think about these two courses, the foundation courses, the CQI IRCA foundation courses, and you can find more information about them here, but they will cover in much more detail those things that I've just been talking to you about. So they'll give you all of that information and the templates and all the rest of it associated with that, associated with both implementing information management security systems following that IRCA CQI course FD 119, or if you want to know more about internal auditing against 27001 and the nuances associated with that, not just general auditing, but specifically associated with the practitioner level 27001 internal auditing, then there's some information for you that you can find there. And okay, so I think we're just going to move into a few questions in a minute, but I'm going to pose some questions for you before we do that. Have you ever audited your IT department? Have you ever actually gone out and audited them and see what they get out to? Because I know a lot of organisations haven't done that. They don't see it as core to their business. I would recommend you possibly have a look at that. How many of your IT service suppliers have been audited, or have you reviewed their systems? Has anybody reviewed their systems? What are the legal ramifications associated with your IT service suppliers? Will they, if they haven't done the backups properly and we have major problems with our suppliers, who's going to be at fault, and what are the penalties associated with that? Because the chances are they'll probably give you the money back for the last month's service because they didn't do the backups and your business is in terrible trouble. But they'll give you the money back for the last month's service because they didn't do it very well. But that's about it, because the legal penalties associated, the contractual penalties associated with an IT system going can be absolutely enormous. And so we need to think about what those penalties are and whether we can believe our IT service suppliers are doing these things. So, and are our IT service suppliers 27001 compliant? Have they got a program of introducing 27001 into their systems? Because many of them haven't and aren't 27001 approved. Are your cloud services suppliers secure? And are they 27001 compliant? Do we know this? Because there's a lot of data in there, and who's going to be at fault if we lose that data? Them or you? Who are they going to come after? Your cloud service supplier, or are they going to come after you? Have you ever done a thought experiment? Another question. Have you ever done a thought experiment on what the implications of any of these IT services fail? Have you ever done a thought experiment on what the implications are and just how disastrous that would be for your organization? I've audited many IT service organizations, and on the first time audit, unfortunately, I've never yet failed to find a major NCR in doing an audit on an IT service supplier. So I think that's something that you might like to consider going forward. Thank you very much. I'll hand you back, I believe, to Alex. And
yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. That was really interesting. A really good look at information management. Sorry, a really good look at information security management systems and the implications it has for our organisations. I think there are a couple of interesting points that you raised, particularly at the end there, about who is ultimately responsible for the security of the information that an organisation controls in an environment where so often information management processes are outsourced. How many organisations these days run their own IT systems in-house.
Yeah, there are some others as well. HR, very often, all of the HR data is in the cloud, held with some organization or other that provides their their human resources software. How secure is it? Do you know? What's the implications of them not being very secure? And what controls have they got in place? And how much can we trust them? It's all of these nuances. Very often, another one is websites. Who manages our website? We probably outsource that. That's fine, great. It's outsourced. Do you know how many vulnerabilities there are in WordPress? Because the chances are that their website has been written in WordPress, and there are any number of vulnerabilities within WordPress. And can you imagine the damage that's going to be done to your reputation if somebody decides to hack your website and bring it down and put some spurious information up there? It doesn't bear thinking about. It doesn't bear thinking about. So have we checked? Do we know?
And I think,
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, this is a really interesting train of conversation, because information security is very often seen as being an IT thing, and this is the responsibility of the IT people. So where then, and this is a question that perhaps we'll come on to in a minute, where then does the handover to the quality of the management systems audit function come? But where you raised there issues around HR systems, web hosting, payroll, how many of those things are provided by external organizations, and is the organization, is your organization, the attendees on this call, doing everything they can to ensure that that organization is properly equipped to manage their information security?
I think it begs another question as well. Is this quality department's role? Is it? It's nothing to do with me. Don't ask, and I'm okay. So the minute you start asking these questions, is this the role for the quality department to ask these sort of questions, or should we stay out of the way of it, because it's a bit tricky, and there's a lot of people that are quite nervous of actually going and auditing IT because it's so techie. And you're kind of thinking, well, I don't know whether I'll be able to manage to audit those sorts of areas, because I'm very nervous of going into those areas, because I'll look silly, because there's so much, and these young lads in there, they're so much cleverer than me and know so much more than me that I don't know whether I'll be pressing the right button. Well, I'm not an expert in IT. Trust me, I'm not. That's not my background. Although I'm a mechanical engineer. But when I've done the audit in IT, some of the things you turn over are really quite scary.
And I think this is one of the key issues where the role, the function of the quality professional becomes so critical, so important, as that custodian, that champion, and that leader of governance, assurance, and improvement within the context of that organisation, what it does, how it does it, and who it does it with, supported by and exemplified by strong leadership. I hate to crowbar the CQI competence framework in there, but that's why it's there. So what the quality professional should be looking for is not necessarily having to translate and interpret lines and lines and lines of code. It is to understand whether the systems for managing that governance, assurance, and improvement of information security exist both within your organization and in your suppliers. So more and more, this becomes a supply chain issue as much as it is an immediate.
I think there's a number of levels to this, and you're quite right, Alex. And one of the level associated with this is this my job? So I'm the quality manager. Is it my job to go and stick my head above the parapet and say, I'm going to go and do an audit on IT? And what would that audit, if I did an audit of IT, what would that audit comprise of? Well, I can give you some clues about what that audit should comprise of. We've spoken about the IRCA CQI courses, because they will give you loads of clues about what you've got to do and the audit and all that sort of thing. But the question is there an area that I'm responsible for? And if the answer is no, that's fine. But who is? Because if it's not you, then it's got to be somebody else. And I have a little bit of a problem with it if you say it's nothing to do with me, mate, because somebody's got to protect the customer, and very often the role of the quality department is to, you are the customer within that organization, protecting the customer's interests within that organization. So and I'm on dodgy ground, and you've got to be fair to college managers. You've got flipping enough to do without me making any thundering worse for them, goodness sake. Thank you very much, Jeff, clear off. And I wouldn't blame them, a lot of them say that right now, but I think somebody's got to just think about this thing fairly carefully. Sorry, Alex.
Well, to develop that idea a bit further then, Jeff, here's the question for you. Obviously, what we're describing here is a profession that is responsible for an organization's QMS. If we're going to be looking at information security as well, then we also need to have an IMSS. Now, we need to think about GDPR as well. So we can either just leave that to the data protection officer, or we can look at ISO 27701 and have a third management system to enable us to manage these three completely disparate and unrelated parts of our organization. Or, Jeff, is there a slightly more intelligent way of bringing these different standards? Where are the opportunities to integrate information security and data protection across an organization's system for managing its business?
Yeah, it can be scary big, and we don't want it to be scary big. And I think some parts of 27,000 you might consider scary big. We don't need to go as big as that. So there's two parts to your question. There's the part, well, what are these laws and what are the implications for me, and what are the security officer associated with GDPR we've appointed going to do? Well, and then we haven't got one, Jeff. We can't afford one or whatever. There are loads of government sites associated with this stuff. If you look at a government site and put in GDPR or data protection, loads of information there giving you some clues as to what that's all about. Can we integrate this? Because, how big do you want to make this thundering thing? We've got health and safety, and you've given us environment, and now you're giving us information as well, Jeff. When are we going to stop? Well, at the moment, I'm going to stop at quality, information security, health and safety, and environmental, because they seem to be the structure of it, and some of the people might chuck in a few more as well, but we'll leave that for another day. So what can we put this into a box a bit more, because this is at the moment a little bit scary big? Well, for me, I think what we've got to try and do is to do two things. One is to do a gap analysis and understand where we are with it all within our organization. How big is it, and how close are we? And the second thing that doesn't have to be too fancy is to do a risk assessment to identify where are big risks, because we don't have to go the full 9 yards to get ourselves approved and all those sort of things, unless, of course, you're an IT supplier of services. Then I think there's a big argument that says that I would be quite nervous about using an organisation that weren't 27,001 approved, because it does give you that some sort of protection, although weak as it is, there from that perspective. So for me, I think those are the things that I like to do. If you want to get a bit more information, go look at the government site. There's loads of stuff, but maybe consider doing a gap analysis, a little gap analysis, and a risk assessment, just so you understand the scope of it a little bit clearer, rather than no, I'll stay away from it for the time being. Thank you very much. But that could be a gentle step, because you're not going to change anything. The vulnerabilities are there now, today. You're not changing anything. It's just that you will be perhaps a little bit more aware of them. They're already there. We all, but we've taken steps to try and do something about. Sorry, Alex.
No, I absolutely agree. The implication of what you've just said there is that in many instances, organisations will already have the processes and procedures in place to address issues around information security. So when looking at ISO 27001, if organisations choose to adopt that as a framework to manage their information security management, one doesn't necessarily have to start from scratch. As you say, a risk assessment to address the nearest crocodiles, the hairiest monsters, a gap analysis to look at what's already there in place that becomes part of that management system, can then highlight the gaps, and then being able to look at other aspects of the system for managing business, can identify where, through your quality management system, potentially through your environmental or occupational health and safety, you may already be covering.
There's lots of things already in there that are there already because management reviews. Yeah, we don't want to make them any thundering bigger than they are, for goodness sake. But you can, you've already got that structure in place. Audits, you just add in another element into that, and the main element that you're adding in there will be the IT department, because you're already auditing HR and all those, and maybe we need to add into that audit program the IT department, and it doesn't have to be big. It could be quite a tight checklist associated with IT, just to embrace that. Yeah.
And there have been a couple of questions that have come in along those lines. To what extent do auditors have to dig into other departments across an organisation? Do auditors need to look at HR systems? They need to look at IT systems, and I suppose absolutely where it comes within the scope of the management system, and where there are risks and opportunities to an organisation's management of information security, that becomes part of the scope of the information management system.
Yeah, so I keep harping back to this, but the things that give you some clues are these IRCA courses, give you a lot more clues as to what to look for, but it doesn't have to be a massive step. It's just a level of understanding that we feel more confident about the controls we've got in place. But I will remind you of this: when I've done an audit of the IT department for the first time, I've never yet not found a major discrepancy, and and they're really serious. It's like, you've done backups? Yeah, of course we do backups. And the classic one is, when did you last test the backup? What do you mean test? I mean, have you restored it? Have you restored the data? Just no, we haven't actually done that.
Yeah. And where is your process for assuring the integrity of that backup process?
Exactly, yeah. And it's like,
look,
those
Jeff,
vulnerabilities are there now. We're not changing anything. We're not going to rush out and do something tomorrow, because we're not, they're there. But the mistake is not trying to make sure that we've not identified them, we know about them, now we can do something about them. It's preventive.
Yeah. Fantastic. Jeff, I'm conscious of time, and I'm sure that we, our members have got many other things to address today and have taken time out of their schedules to attend. So could I just round off first of all by saying thank you very much, both for the presentation and for this discussion. I always like it when you get a bit of a meaty discussion at the end of these events, because you really get to develop some of the ideas and talk in a bit more detail about some of the practical implications of these issues. Just to reiterate to attendees, this webinar will be made available on the website, so you can go back, you can revisit what Jeff said, you can revisit this discussion. I'd encourage you to do so, because it's always nice to reflect back on this kind of content. The slides are available in the handout section. You should be able to download them there, so please take a look. And as Jeff has said, do please, if you want to look more specifically at ISO 27001, the CQI and IRCA Certified Training Course provides a foundation on the standards, and there is of course the suite of auditor training courses 27001 also. So have a look for those resources, and please also have a look on the CQI website, because there are some really interesting case studies. There are some articles and technical papers which relate to this, and also relate to GDPR and data privacy management, which have started to kind of come into the periphery of information security management systems in recent times. So go and have a look at the website. Just a couple of notices for what's coming up. We're going to continue with our program of webinars in the future. So take a look at the events calendar on the CQI website to see what we have in store for 2021. We've got a series of webinars about to support you through your member journey with the CQI, as well as some providing some technical insight and input and professional development opportunities such as this. On which one webinar to highlight is coming up, making the most of disruptive change. The CQI's recent Managing Disruptive Change Guide was developed to help organisations navigate their way through the COVID shift, and for those in the UK and the EU, navigating their way through the disruption caused by Brexit, another hot topic. So please, I'd encourage you to attend that webinar. And as I said at the beginning, at the end of this, please do go back, reflect on what you've learnt, and update your CPD log accordingly. It should then identify new opportunities for further learning. And I always like to think of January as being a good time to sit down and map out your learning journey for the coming year. So I'd encourage you to do that. That's enough from me. That's enough from Jeff. Thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate your support as members in attending these. Please let us know your feedback in the feedback survey that will follow, and I'll look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex.